Hello and welcome to What Moves Us, the podcast where we ask what moves us, or more accurately, what's going to move us in future.
With the Rail Innovation Group's Johannah and Liam Henderson, we look at debates, themes and decisions of the minute that will impact on the way we get about in the future.
Hi Liam, hi Johannah, how are we?
Excited about the King's speech?
We should probably say this is our first podcast since the election. But so we're very happy that we actually may know what's happening in future with transport and rail. Let's hope.
Well, yes, we've got it's good that the government has got a good majority, I would say. That means that hopefully we'll have a bit of sort of stability over the next 5 years. And also I thought it was quite, all of the shadow ministers, pretty much all of the shadow ministers went into, stayed in their roles, because that also gives quite a bit of continuity, certainly for us with Louise Hay staying in post.
It's interesting that you mentioned about the large majority, because the last government had a large majority as well, but for rail didn't really achieve much. And I I think back to when we did a podcast on the William Shapps plan, and here we are 3 years later and not much has changed really, has it?
No, but I do. I'm sort of hearing encouraging noises about, well, they certainly seem to be trying to hit the ground running and get, with all the regulation bill that was in front of in the King's speech was quite good. I heard Andy Burnham talking about it this morning on the Today programme.
So what did we think? What did we hear that was good in the King's speech yesterday for rail?
Well, I think first of all, it was in the first King's speech, so it's obviously a very high priority. I believe you've sent some notes around what you think the implications are, but my sense is that it's a large transformation to put it back together, to put rail back together. And the five, what do we call them? The 5 priorities or missions, the ones that came out from the department last included integrated transport and fixing buses, which is one of the major things that I think always gets forgotten, is the people getting to mass transit.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think it's also really, really encouraging that they've brought in Lord Peter Hendy in as a rail minister, because I think he's obviously got lots of experience in rail transport infrastructure.
That's the really interesting thing about the whole Labour government, though, isn't it? Because it's not just about Lord Peter Hendy, but it's actually across the whole government, is that there seems to be a re-establishment of experts and talking to people who have experience in these areas, so can bring real insight, and so maybe can identify what the challenges are, but also they know what the solutions and opportunities could be to resolve them.
Yeah, agreed. Peter Hendy was an example from transport, but as you say, they're right across the board. They buy in from citizens to talk about, the problems in the prison service. So I think it is really encouraging, and I think it's really encouraging. Not that I know, of course, the government are in a honeymoon period and all the rest of it, but to hear the Prime Minister say, "Look, I'll work with anyone, cross-party, whoever, for a common good, which is to kind of get the country back on its feet." I think it's very encouraging, whichever sector you're in. So I just hope that they can, they've inherited certainly Louise Hay in transport is inheriting a really sort of difficult fiscal position, her department. So let's hope they can, be something.
Yeah,
good.
And I think that's interesting, because we're talking about the rail reform and what's in this legislation. So as Liam said, positive that it's in the first King's speech, so it means it is a priority. But of course, the devil is in the detail of what the timetable will be for legislation and getting things through. Because Louise Hay also said that the big priority is obviously sorting out performance and also the industrial relations that have plagued the railway for the last couple of years as well. But as I think, Liam, you've mentioned in previous podcasts that transport is an enabler for the economy, and this is also going to be quite key for getting the the economy going as well. What do you think, Liam?
I think yes. I mean, well, a couple of thoughts there. Is one is that I think I would like to know more to be assured that turning it into a big integrated national system will not mean we end up like a previously state-run system with blanket solutions and blanket procurement and national sort of contracts, which make it very, very difficult for small companies to thrive, which is what has been a benefit of the sort of more fragmented rail network that we've had. So we have had great ideas coming in because you could test them in small environments. If we're going to go to a world of European style mass sort of one size fits all contracts, that will become a procurement barrier to small companies. And I think it does risk less dynamic and less responsive services and ideas. Trains will run, it's just that the best ideas might not come through from the supply chain.
And so I guess you would hope that the devolution stuff might mean that those kind of as procurement of the story are sort of in that devolved context, so they're not part of the bigger, the big sort of national kick. That there's a guiding mind. To use the old phrase from of what Great British Railways is supposed to be, and then
one big difference as well within this legislation, because the previous administration always talked about a guiding mind. This legislation sets out a directing mind.
Yeah, I think that's encouraging. I also think that, and this is a bit of a wider point, but there's been the government, the new cabinet have talked a lot, and the Prime Minister's talked a lot about move towards what I think they're calling it like a multilateral approach between government departments. And that for transport, I think, is really important because it means that they might well look at things like degree and all of that kind of thing, about how they kind of make the case for, how they appraise kind of, the business case for new rail, new infrastructure, all the rest of it, because they'll want to, they want to kind of bring those 5 priorities for rail into a much more broader context to be able to, I suppose, tick other boxes, if you like, from across other departments. So placemaking, environment, net zero targets, communities, regeneration, housing, all those things, for me, that's really positive as well for transport generally. They want to look at it in a much more holistic way, and they want to bring different departments together on some of those conversations.
Yeah, I would say that on that, we should get an indication quite early on, because if these plans for 1.5 million houses come online with new towns, are the railway stations going to be built at these new towns? Are the bus lanes going to be put in? And are the bike lanes all going to be laid out through these towns?
I guess that's the other thing, though, that's quite interesting about what was in the rail reforms in the 2 pieces of legislation too in the King's Speech was it specifically mentioned the north of England, but didn't mention East-West Rail. And East-West Rail obviously, has the opportunity to create a lot of new towns as well along there, which, whilst appreciate that it is still sort of like southeast, what is quite important for East-West Rail is that it creates that link for the innovation and technology arch between Oxford, Milton Keynes, and Cambridge. But also, once you've linked up East-West Rail, you also create great links towards Norwich and also Leicester as well, for those innovation hubs as well, for the centres of excellence at those universities too. So East-West Rail, as sort of an enabler for housing, for economy, for technology, is really, really important. And I'm surprised that wasn't mentioned as part of the legislation.
Well, Andy Burnham mentioned it this morning, didn't he, when he spoke on the Today programme, and he also mentioned, so my ears pricked up, of course, I wanted to hear if he was going to say anything about HS2, because they asked him inevitably about HS2, and he was I thought what he said was quite interesting. He said, whilst we're not proposing to bring HS2 in its current form back on the table, we are completely in agreement that we need more rail capacity, and that has to be new lines. So we can't bring HS2 trains. What he said was it's completely unfeasible to bring the HS2 trains past Birmingham onto the existing network because it's full. So
and that is also.
So he was basically, for me, that was him saying, well, we might not be building HS2, in inverted commas, as per, the previous government's version, but we will have to build something. So I think the devil's in the detail, obviously, because there's lots of people in the rail industry saying, well, certainly phase 2A needs to be built for any past crew to be feasible. But,
I think the legislation backs that up, because basically it's just saying that it's almost like they are treating it as a planning mechanism. They're saying the bill is laid, we don't necessarily have to build HS2, but we do need to build the infrastructure. So why not just build what's in the legislation, even if it's not just HS2 and it is just about, as you say, capacity. And I think that brings it on to the fact that they've specifically mentioned rail freight as well, because that's the other important aspect, that the additional track for HS2 was going to release capacity for more rail freight, not just passenger services, but also rail freight. But whilst they've put the support in for rail freight, was it Royal Mail are closing their recently built depot?
And they're ceasing all rail transport for mail.
Yeah, which I thought was a really disappointing thing to hear. And
given sort of like, supermarkets, for example, Tesco, well known. They really see the importance of transporting goods by freight. I wonder why while Royal Mail are reversing that decision.
I wonder whether it was. I haven't read into it, and I should have done, really, because obviously we've done quite a bit of stuff on freight, and we helped Baroness Rail with their event, didn't we? Just trying to sort of encourage more logistics onto rail. But I did read that all of the fleet, all of the Royal Mail fleet were basically coming to right at the end of their life, and I'm assuming it's just a kind of financial decision. It's like, well, we need to either get new trains or refurbish these trains, and where's the money?
All comes down to money, doesn't it?
Yes, but But as far as I have seen, those Royal Mail trains are not very long, and therefore those paths will now be available for very long freight trains. There you go. Positives.
Well, yeah, and I think well, I guess it remains to be seen what happens with Royal Mail anyway, doesn't it?
Yes.
Essentially being bought out by a billionaire, aren't they?
Yes. I think that's the plan, with guaranteed 6-day delivery for the next 5 years. Yes. Now, could we move on to discuss our thought piece? Because flying under the radar before the election, we published a thought piece that Deb, you as head of initiative, brought together. So did you want to give us a quick intro as to what we did?
Yes, well, we did. We do these thought pieces from time to time, and they're badged as small voices. It's a small voices program. Obviously, that's alluding to our membership, which is obviously small and micro companies, and it's just kind of a way of using some of the sort of narrative that we hear from our members to bring together whatever we decide to do in terms of the program as we move through the year. So this one was about reflecting sort of UK startups experience, I suppose, in how they kind of access international opportunities, procurement contracts opportunities and that kind of thing. So as always with these reports, we speak to our members, we do a bit of a survey to get a sense of some of the issues that they want us to kind of bring out in the report, and then we do some more in-depth discussion, and then we sort of bring it together as an anonymised kind of piece of content really, which is what we did. So we talked about, how important it is for startups and small companies to be able to compete globally, how important it is for economic growth and innovation, all the things that you'd expect us to say really. To some of their strategies, challenges, successes and things like that, and pulled out some case studies and things like that. Look at,
I guess we should, for the listeners, we should explain the reason why we anonymize it is because we have startups. So if we put the name of the company, it'd be very easy to work out who said that. And so it's to protect the confidence of the conversations we have with the members.
Yes, correct. And we put, and in it, we did a bit of kind of research looking at the sort of, we dropped into the report a bit of a kind of overview of the global digital and technology emerging markets across the world kind of thing. So that's quite interesting actually to just have a look at that really. I mean, it's obviously it's an ever-changing landscape. There's lots of places now, Africa has got like, quite a young connected population. So there's lots of quite interesting sort of untapped potential going on there in terms of digital and tech innovation. That was quite interesting to do that research and sort of drop that in. Then we just used, some experiences from members who have won some international contracts, to sort of, some sort of learning insights, I suppose, for other small companies to be able to kind of have a look at. I mean, these reports are quite short and snappy and hopefully engaging, easy to read. We put in some conclusions and next steps, which we want to actually pick up again. Well, we should look to pick up again with the new government and engage with the government, because we made some, not recommendations as such, but some feedback for the government to consider is in the kind of conclusive part of the report. We'll need to have a think about how we engage with the new government on that.
Yeah. Great. What surprised you in compiling this report?
Nothing surprised me really, to be honest. I mean, I suppose what did surprise me was that, because I have to be honest and say that I thought that we weren't. I wondered when I put the call out to members to say, what have, has anyone had any successes? I wondered whether we'd just get a flat. Well, no, not really. We've tried very hard. We never seem to get anywhere. So I think I was quite encouraged really. And it was interesting, quite a few of them talked about international trade shows being really helpful, making unexpected connections, that kind of thing. And I think one of the other things that came out quite strongly was having, if our members had worked with bigger entities or had kind of significant contracts from sort of well-known entities, to give an example, Transport for London or something like that. And that was kind of viewed that was obviously viewed quite positively when you're putting in a proposal where you can kind of cite some of those other contracts, because it's kind of, I suppose it provides like a reassurance buffer, that you've actually worked with some significant organisations, even though you're quite, you might be a very small company that doesn't have much of a track record in whatever country you're posing to work in. So yeah, there was some other bits that I thought we could have more of a look at, more detailed stuff around getting visas to be, and all that kind of thing. But to be honest, I think we took the sort of pragmatic decision that we wasn't really where we wanted this report to land around those kind of messages.
So do you think some of our community then find it easier to do business abroad than they do within the UK?
I think that was the case with some of them, although there was also quite a strong sort of message around the fact that people are looking abroad a lot more for contracts, because they're finding that that's something that might start to change as the kind of the new government is in here, and with a bit more of a secure, sustainable pipeline of work, which is what we're talking about now, encouragingly. I think, over the last, we've had a pretty kind of stop-start pipeline in the UK over the last certainly the last 5 years. We've had a lot of churn in government. We've had a lot of projects cancelled. We've had a lot of delays, kind of, things like electrification. None of that helped. So, yeah, I think it was more interesting people were actually saying that they were looking elsewhere because they didn't feel confident about contracts in the UK being there for them.
Yeah, I think I think that's something that's almost become clearer in the last couple of weeks since we do have a new government, that you're hearing more from people from the inside and government and also within through media and that it's becoming apparent that because you felt it, but the country had almost ground to a halt in the last 18 months. It was almost like the Conservative government knew they were going to lose, so they'd given up. And so they just weren't making decisions on everything. They were cancelling stuff and that, and they were just focusing in on their very, stop the boat, and things like that, rather than actually getting on with the business of governing. Are you feeling that? Do you think that was reflected in what you were hearing from the community?
Yeah, no, that was reflected, and I think that's reflected in the wider industry with other work that I do as well. I think it's really, it was really disappointing that, and the trouble is, and I don't, I know I always veer into the politics, and I don't mean to, but we did have a government that became very sort of ideologically driven, and I think that's why I've said earlier I'm really encouraged to hear new Prime Minister say, I'm happy to work with anyone who is, prepared to kind of come together for a common good around, making UK a better place, a more successful place economically and socially. So I think that's really encouraging.
Encouraging, but hard to do.
Well, it is hard to do. I mean, that's why. But I was reading. I've been reading, quite a lot about the fact that it seems like the government are already looking at their strategy for 5 years' time when there is another election, because they have got like a, they're going to release this 10-year infrastructure strategy. They clearly have got a 10-year plan, and they've got a very clear path to getting elected again, to have 2 terms, to be able to succeed in that. And even that in itself, for me, is quite encouraging, because for me, it tells you that they've got a very clear strategy that they know it's not going to be an instant kind of fix, and they need that time to get us to where we need to be, whether that's, I know that, and there are a lot of other priorities competing with, things like transport. Obviously our interest is transport, but, the prison service is falling apart, schools are falling down, the NHS is in crisis. So they've got lots of priorities, but I think it's encouraging that they don't seem to be sort of funneling their interests into kind of, any particular sort of ideological positions about things. They're very sort of fixed on policy change for, improvements, which I find very encouraging.
It's a difficult challenge, though, isn't it? Because, whilst we have veered into the politics and the challenges and that, is that very quickly, in order to get permission to deliver that 10-year plan, people have to feel better about everything. So people will have to, we will have to feel better about the train services. We'll have to feel that the trains are getting better, that they're getting a grip of performance. That people want to see fares reform come through quite quickly. I think because I think it will be interesting to see what I think the Scottish Government will be reporting shortly on the outcome of the off-peak fares. Trial that they've been running to see whether that's had any benefit, whether it's increased rail travel use. It certainly feels as though the trains have been busier, but whether that's been directly because of off-peak fares, it'll be interesting to see whether that has been the case. Because I think, from a personal point of view, what I've liked about it personally is you don't have to think about when you travel; you just travel. So I think that's been quite a nice benefit of that. You don't think, oh, well, I can't travel until 10 o'clock or whatever. Although, having said that, I just learned this week that LNER are still charging the peak fare, even though ScotRail have been trialling this off peak. So I thought that was quite interesting, because the LNER train from Pitlochry leaves 1 minute before the peak runs out, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, isn't it?
I've been doing just to plug on another piece of work I've been doing. I've been helping another client, Green Gauge 21, with a piece of work they've been doing, which is partly funded by Greenpeace and partly funded by the Foundation for Integrated Transport. And it's a ticketing piece. It's a report, quite a detailed report. And it's about, it's basically proposing a subscription model for ticketing in the UK. So it's using the example of the climate ticket in Germany that's just been introduced, and one that's been introduced in France as well. I think people are looking at it, quite a few places in Europe, looking at this kind of basically a subscription model where you pay, I think in Germany it's 49 euros a month, and you can just travel certain intercity. I mean, it's not as straightforward as that. I won't go into all the massive detail of it. We could maybe put a link to the report somewhere when it's not been published yet.
Germany have had that ticket for a while, but it's just not been as cheap. So in Germany, you've always been able to purchase an annual ticket that allowed you to travel throughout Germany, except on the ICE services.
Yeah, but this is different because this is a subscription model ticket.
Yeah.
So this is where you sign up for a subscription like you would for Netflix, and you actually pay a monthly, you pay direct debit every month, and then you've just got a ticket. So that's totally simply, really simplified. Yeah. I mean, they've had it in Germany for a while. It's been picked up in other places, but it's a really interesting time for the UK government to potentially look at something like that. And they've looked very carefully in this report about the revenue, obviously how much revenue you would lose, because ultimately you do lose revenue, but actually you don't lose you don't lose that much revenue. It's balancing that against kind of like passenger numbers, because passenger numbers in Germany have increased quite dramatically over the time that they've introduced that over the last. They've got quite good data because it's obviously been in. I think they've had it
for a couple of years, hasn't it?
But that's of course 3 years.
But mentioning Germany is also quite interesting because they've had that success. But as was frequently reported during the recent Euros, is that they've also got big rail problems because they've had a underinvestment for many years, and they've got so much, investment they need to do because they've got a 50 billion investment gap or something because they're still state operated. They find it very difficult to put money into it, and I think the German infrastructure in general is in a very poor state, and they need to invest.
Yeah, and I mean, the report hasn't looked at that specifically, but what it has done is it has looked at the capacity issue around that, because if you actually, these subscription models will increase the passenger numbers. That's what the evidence tells you. So obviously for the UK, that's interesting because we're going to have a capacity issue anyway. If we do nothing. So if we introduced a new streamlined ticketing service that actually encourages even more people onto rail, than, for example, the latest steer, analysis suggested whatever the percentage was of increase in passengers over the next decade, then that would be, they'd have to look. Obviously, that would have to be looked at, because if we're capacity challenged anyway, then.
So, do you think it's something that the UK government would seriously look at?
Well, I mean, to me, it seems like a really interesting thing to look at, because I just think for you can sort of adapt. I don't know, like young people would get like discounts. Potentially people on low incomes could get discounts, but it certainly makes the system a lot fairer.
Because in Scotland, under 22s get free travel.
Yeah.
As do over 60s. I think obviously because it's long established, over 60s travel is quite, lots of people do use public transport, but I think what's interesting about the under 22 case study, and I'm not quite sure whether they've published any findings on it yet, because I think it's been running maybe about 18 months, the under 22s, but particularly, it's particularly peculiar to Scotland anyway, is there's a lot of transport deserts in Scotland. So you might have lots of under 22-year-olds, but they've got no access to any public transport to get the free travel anyway. So I think when you look at some of the things that you get access to, it benefit something like this would benefit people in urban, highly populated areas, wouldn't it, rather than people in the rural areas? And when you look at sort of, net zero and carbon reductions, that you don't necessarily get, the rural areas benefiting as well. So it's how do you solve those challenges?
I had a question on that, which is the legislation that was announced yesterday in the King's Speech all focuses on England. So how well will England now work with Scotland if we're bringing in a national organisation that also there's a separate Scottish national organisation?
I don't know, but I thought I did read. I did do a quick read of the King's Speech, and I thought they said this will apply UK wide. So that is going to be interesting about how that's going to work, not just in Scotland but also Wales as well. So, and I guess really, and that comes back to Deb's point about I will work with anybody, and I guess and I guess behaviour is a good indication of the fact that he will work with anybody, because one of the first things he did was he went to meet all the respective first ministers and legislative leaders in their country or in the nations. So I guess that means that that is encouraging that there will be joint working parties, and maybe that's also an encouragement about Lord Hendy being in place as a minister as well, is that maybe there'll be some more movement on his connectivity report, because that seems to have been done and nothing happened with it. And I know certainly officials in Scotland have been quite frustrated at the lack of movement on improving connectivity between nations. And I know that there is discussions, going on that, not just wanting to improve connectivity to England, but also to Ireland and Wales as well.
So yeah, I agree with you, Johannah. I think
to reduce flying.
Yeah, I think it was encouraging that the first thing the new Prime Minister did was go to all of the regions and nation, and I thought that was a good indication of how he's proposing to kind of move forward on all of that. And I think certainly from a rail connectivity perspective, with my other hat on with the High Speed Rail Group, we're one of our sort of, we did a 5 recommendations to government report, which we then kind of rehashed into a sort of letter to the new Secretary of State for Transport, say this is what we think you should be looking at as a matter of relative urgency in your role, and one of those was that to not lose sight of that kind of, that was something that was agreed between the Scottish, Scotland and England, that we would be looking at into a 3-hour or just on 3-hour journey time to Scotland, which requires new rail investment.
Yeah. And I think that's really important about, as you say, building, we need something, even if it's not high speed too, because we've mentioned before on previous podcasts is that the cancellation of phase 2 means that we can't build more capacity in Scotland because phase 2 is needed. When people know I used to work for HS2, but when we used to say, more people will benefit from, HS2 as a result of the capacity released, it wasn't a made up statistic. You didn't need to be on the line to benefit from the additional capacity, and Scotland is definitely a beneficiary of that, because it means that we can run more in Scotland, and it also means, because it frees up capacity, and it also means we can run more to other parts of England and Wales as well in order to do that, because it's limited the whole of capacity in Scotland. There is no more room.
Yeah.
Yes, agreed.
Right. I think that brings us to the end of our post-election / thought piece episode. Where can we find the thought piece?
On the website.
On
the Rail Innovation Group website.
.com, yes. We will be considering doing more thought pieces in future, so watch this space as Deb tells us what we're studying in future.
Yes, I don't know what we're studying in the future, but we'll come up with something very interesting. We're just having a talk with our members to see what they want to do.
Yes, and
I've got an idea, which I'll talk to you offline.
Good. Don't commit to it on the podcast.
Definitely not. Because I'm not very good at commitments, am I?
I think we're all taking a few weeks off for summer reflections now. But then we will be reconvening for September and looking forward to Inner Trans.
Hooray!
So we'll do a pod from there.
Yes, we will. That'll be our next one, won't it?
Hopefully, yes, probably, most likely. Great. Okay. Well,
Thanks, everyone.
good time today. We'll see you later.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to another episode of What Moves Us. We hope we moved you. For more episodes, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our channel.
Till next time.